Hi, folks. Welcome to another edition of Outro, the show about shows and the show that deals with shows right here on the writer Albert Lanier channel. And I normally I would have an episode like this. For those of you who are unfamiliar with this show, this is a show about any appearance, any media interview I do, any talk show, podcast, radio show that I do, and I deal with. So it's a show about shows. It's kind of unusual, and it only occurs. So it's also unusual in that this episodes only occur after I've done a show. So I have to be on a show, I have to be interviewed, I have to be doing a show, and then I could do this show. So it's not like I do this show every week or every month or so forth. So it's the first outro of the new year. And actually, this episode is about appearance I did on the Ochelli effect, where I was talking about my brand new essay. Well, it was an intro essay to my brand new workshop slash seminar called Dual Story Structures. And dual story structures, and you can check out my intro essay. You can go to allanier.substack.com. That's Al Lanier, ALLANIER .substack.com. SUBSTACK.com. So allanier.substack.com to read my essay, Dual Story Structures, a method for screenwriting. And basically what dual story structures is a idea I got about screenwriting, which is odd because I'm not a screenwriter by profession. I'm a writer, as people familiar with this channel know. I've been a writer for 30 years. I was a freelance journalist and writer for 22 years, and then I've written for publications for the remaining 7-8 years. And of course, last year was my 30th anniversary. And it was, now that 2024 has just passed a day ago or so, I have to remark before I go into the show and talk about the episode. One of the things I wanted to do is talk about how busy 2024 was for me, unexpectedly busy. It was it was unusually busy for me. It was unusually busy for me because I didn't really expect to be involved with a number of projects last year. So last year, for those who may not be aware of it, was my 30th anniversary as a professional writer and as a writer in general. And I wrote my 30th anniversary article for my Substack. What happened last year was I ended up starting a new, what they call newsletter on the platform Substack. I already had a newsletter there called That Is the Week That Is, and you can check that out. You can go to albertlanier.substack.com to check that out. But I already had a newsletter, and I decided to finally get back to writing about film because I used to be a film critic and reviewer for about 8 years. And I covered film festivals for about 15 years as a journalist and writer overall, and also as a film reviewer. But I decided to get back to writing about films. So I created another newsletter on Substack called Final Cut. And and then in April of 2024. And then in June, I created a podcast called Final Cut. It's the first time I did a podcast. And then later on, I did another podcast, which I'm wrapping up now. We're heading into the final week. It's called Outside the NFL. And of course, it's about what else? Football. It's about the NFL. That was a completely unexpected. So 2024 has been very busy, and I've been busy with Outside the NFL for the past 3 or 4 months, I think. Yeah, I think about 4 months at this point. And So it was a unusually busy year. So unexpectedly busy year. So 30th anniversary year, you have like I started getting into podcasting for the first time. I had a brand new newsletter. Just a lot of things were happening or happened in 2024. So very busy year. I thought I was just going to celebrate my anniversary and leave it at that. So in any event, I say all that because dual story structures is in my Substack Final Cut. And that's why I mentioned allanier.substack.com and the Final Cut newsletter, which is where you can read it. Dual story structures fundamentally is they are a couple of structures, what I call narrative exoskeletons for screenwriting. And what happened was this. A friend of mine who's an actress slash filmmaker. She's someone that I've actually interviewed for my podcast Final Cut and also for my newsletter Final Cut. And she had started a film festival in Las Vegas. And I was supposed to fly out there and I guess cover it for my newsletter or go to the festival. And unfortunately, my podcast outside the NFL which has taken up a good deal of my time in the past, 4 months thus far. We're heading into the final stretch now. And so, because you got prep time and, you got all this stuff that I've had to do with the podcast, that's why I'm really going to have a lot of time on my hands once outside the NFL is done. So, in any event, I was busy with that and finally was getting around to trying to book a ticket and trying to get a hotel and all of that. And it just didn't work. I wasn't able to do it. I wasn't able to come out. And I called her afterwards and I said, look, sorry I couldn't make it. And she was telling me more about her film festival and that she did workshops. And I told her, you know what? I'll try to come out there sometime in the future and do a workshop. And so when I got the idea for dual story structures, it's two basic story structures for scripts, for screenplays. Excuse me. It can also work for television, but that's a whole other thing. But I was doing, I came up with this concept because I was looking at a YouTube channel called James Whale Bake Sale. And that's where I got the idea. It really came from two areas, two strange, disparate areas. One was, I was thinking about a comment I had made on Twitter. I guess it's called X, but I like to call it Twitter, where I was responding to what somebody had said about the Marion Crane character in the movie Psycho, and how that character stole money from the office. And I said, well, that was an easy way. That was a nice, simple way of getting her to the Bates Motel. And what I was realizing in that instance, although my background is as a journalist and a writer when it comes to film and covering film festivals and writing about film, reviewing film, and later analyzing film, because I've been on the show, on the podcast Close Watch, CLOSE Watch, Close Watch. I was there the past couple of years reviewing movies, analyzing movies. What I realized was that I was thinking about story and script very differently than I normally would as having been a reviewer and a critic. And then I was thinking about, strangely enough, this student film festival I covered in Honolulu, my hometown, a number of years ago. And part of that student film festival was a screenwriting course that was taught by a guy called Ty Holler, who was at the Vancouver Film School. And this was in a movie theater, actually. We were in a movie theater, so it was appropriate. And we were watching, and what he did in teaching the course was to go through a movie and sort of beat by beat, step by step, scene by scene, go through the basics of screenwriting and the aspects of screenwriting. Now, my only background in regards to screenwriting was that I had read a couple books on screenwriting. I think maybe Sid Field, and I had read screenplays because I had learned about filmmaking when I was younger. And I had basically learned about screenwriting or what little I knew about screenwriting really came from reading screenplays, which is largely The Empire Strikes Back by Lawrence Kasdan and Lee Brackett, and Citizen Kane screenplay, which I read 30, 40 times. That was written by Citizen Kane, written by um, Orson Welles and Herman Mankiewicz. So I'd read screenplays, or at least a couple of screenplays, over and over again. And I read books on screenplays, or a couple of books, and that was my limited background in learning about screenplays. And so I had taken this course, and we were watching the movie The Sure Thing with John Cusack. Good, solid comedy. I recommend it. And we were going through this step by step, learning, I think, protagonist, antagonist, and eventually rising action climax. Because when I was in college, I had learned dramatic writing, exposition and rising action and climax and denouement, and all of that. So that was those are the two things I was thinking about. This screenwriting course that I had taken as part of this student film festival that I was there to cover as a journalist. I wasn't there on my own, just for my own edification. I was there as a journalist, covering this, working. And then, this idea, the response that I had to the comment on the movie Psycho and the Marion Crane character in that movie. And that's when I started forming the dual story structure A and B. And what I call is narrative exoskeleton. So this is what I was talking about on the show, the Ochelli Effect, which was on either last week or the week before. And the reason why this is a bit late, this episode's a bit late, is I've been busy with my podcast because you're getting the new year. So I had a number of things I had to do, including a haircut, because I cut my own hair. But so I was so I normally would get to this episode, or an episode like this, a day or two after I've done an appearance on a show. But this is like over a week. And so we're into the new year. So maybe it's appropriate that this is kind of done in this new year, 2025. By the way, Happy New Year to those of you out there. Not only my subscribers, but also those of you who may watch this. So I was talking about this on the show, and we went through kind of a sample run. So dual story structures, and the best way to kind of be introduced to this is to read my essay again at allanier.substack.com. That's allanier.substack.com. So check it out there, and you can go into it. But I was talking about that on the show. And also on the show, I was kind of discussing, before we got into that, we were discussing kind of the nature of film criticism and the nature of reviewing. Because you have these quote unquote YouTube reviewers, and you have these film influencers and these movie talkers and these kind of ridiculous people who don't really know anything about movies. So I was sort of excoriating these people and kind of tearing them apart, frankly, because I think, like I said, I haven't been a reviewer and a critic in over a decade, and it seems like things have degenerated and lapsed and gotten. I mean, it's really gotten to a very low level. It's a low sink. I think it's a low sink of intellectual debauchery online in regards to the movie world. In regards to not so much the movie world, but the world of film criticism and film reviewing. And you got people really on YouTube that have no business being reviewers and or critics or talking about movies, period. People like The Critical Drinker, people like Chris Stuckman, and people like Rob Ager, a completely unqualified hack who has no business in analyzing movies, though his videos are sometimes interesting. He has no business reviewing movies or analyzing movies, for that matter. He's a completely unqualified and incompetent individual, this Rob Ager. Not to mention Critical Drinker, and Chris Stuckman. All of them are completely useless and worthless. So I would say that that was what the kind of first part. So it kind of initially, if you want to get to the meat of that, it's getting 30 minutes in or so. It just that's the way the conversation kind of, I don't want to say meandered, but the way that kind of flowed. And of course, dual story structures is basically the structures for helping to write a script, and also could apply to television as well. But I haven't really gone into that yet. So dual story structures is intended only to be taught as a seminar or workshop. Now, will I be teaching it as a seminar or workshop? I'm not quite sure yet. It really depends on demand or interest or any of those things. And if people are interested, again, they can go and take a look at my intro essay, which can be found at allanier.substack.com. And they can contact me if they're interested. Like I said, I have no plans. The only workshop that it's kind of designed for is the workshop that I said I would do for my friend, because I thought this is perfect. And that's why it was created as a workshop or a seminar. So we'll see if that happens. And that's it. But that's what I was talking about on the show. That's what I was discussing. I was discussing all those things on the Ochelli effect. So go take a look at the latest episode, at least with me. Not the latest episode, but the latest interview I did on the Ochelli effect. You can go to Ochelli.com. That's Ochelli.com. That's Ochelli.com. Ochelli.com. So go to Ochelli.com. Take a look at my interview there, which was done in late December. And that's it for another episode of Outro, the show about shows. Until next time, stay out of trouble and stay on the air. Bye, folks.